America's favorite comfort foods began as desperation rations. Cornmeal, fatback, and molasses were calculated to keep enslaved bodies working, not living. But from these scraps, black families created brilliant recipes under the threat of starvation. Why do the classics we eat today trace back to a 1,000-calorie daily shortfall? And whose hands secretly changed the nation's table? The answer is written in ledgers, hunger, and forbidden seeds. Ledger books from plantations spell out the numbers with chilling precision. A typical weekly ration for an enslaved adult in the Upper South meant 10 pounds of cornmeal, 6 pounds of fatback, 3 pounds of flour, and a single quart of blackstrap molasses. These were not generous portions. They were calculated to the ounce, doled out each Saturday by overseers who understood exactly how much food would keep a body working, but never satisfied. In Louisiana's sugar country, the math was even starker. Pork and cornmeal were measured just high enough to prevent collapse, but far below what a laborer burning thousands of calories a day required. The numbers tell a harsh story. Cornmeal and fatback might add up to 1,800 to 2,200 calories daily, leaving a deficit of at least 1,000 calories for anyone swinging a hoe from before sunrise to after sunset. Medical records and overseer reports from the era document the consequences plainly: swelling from malnutrition, outbreaks of pellagra and kwashiorkor, and the desperate practice of eating clay or chalk to fill the emptiness. There was no room for waste. Cornmeal was sometimes unground, the same quality fed to horses. Fatback, salted until nearly inedible, was the only meat most would taste all week. Molasses, a byproduct of the sugar industry, offered a rare hint of sweetness, thick, dark, and doled out with a miser's hand. Every aspect of this ration was designed for profit, not for health. Planters tracked expenses in ledgers, equating food for enslaved people with feed for livestock. In 1818, a purchase record from Montpelier, James Madison's plantation, lists 3 barrels of corn for Negroes and horses, making no distinction between human and animal need. State laws required only necessary food and clothing, but left the specifics up to the owner's discretion. The result was a system that forced black families into permanent hunger, their bodies valued only as long as they could work the fields. Yet even these meager rations were not always guaranteed. During lean seasons or after poor harvests, portions shrank further. Fresh produce was rare, and protein nearly non-existent outside of fatback scraps. The monotony was broken only by what could be scavenged, stolen, or grown in hidden gardens. Crackling bread, cornbread laced with the crunchy residue from rendered fatback, became a small act of defiance. Squeezing every last calorie from what little was given, the weekly ration was not just insufficient, it was a tool of control, a silent calculation scribbled in ink that dictated who would eat and who would go hungry. The ledger's numbers left no doubt. Survival depended on finding something more. Seeds hidden in braids, tucked under tongues, or slipped into the folds of worn cloth. These were the forbidden treasures that enslaved Africans carried across the Atlantic. In the darkness of the slave ships, women pressed black-eyed peas, okra, and rice seeds into their children's hair, refusing to let their heritage be erased. These were not just tokens of memory, but tools for survival, smuggled past captors who saw no value in the knowledge of a farmer or the skill of a cook. On the Carolina coast, planters grew wealthy on rice, but it was the expertise of West African captives that made the crop flourish. They recognized the tidal rhythms, the feel of wet earth, the precise moment to flood a field, or to drain it. Their hands coaxed life from the mud, planting African rice, Oryza glaberrima, whose dark grains had fed their ancestors for centuries. The planters took credit, but it was the enslaved who built the levees, selected the seeds, and harvested the bounty. Black-eyed peas, a staple in West African stews, traveled the Middle Passage as both shipboard rations and hidden legacy. Once in the Americas, these hardy legumes became a lifeline. They thrived in poor soil, fixing nitrogen and providing protein where meat was scarce. In secret gardens behind slave quarters, black-eyed peas grew alongside okra, another African native. Okra's mucilage thickened stews, stretched thin rations, and brought the taste of home to every pot. Broken rice told its own story of adaptation. Planters kept the polished grains for themselves and sold them for profit, but the cast-off fragments, known as middlings, fell to the enslaved. In West Africa, broken rice was never waste. It was the heart of jollof, thieboudienne, and other beloved dishes. On American plantations, cooks simmered these fragments into nourishing porridge, blending African technique with whatever scraps they could find. These seeds and skills were not random acts of chance. They were deliberate acts of resistance, a quiet refusal to surrender identity. Enslaved women, often the keepers of botanical wisdom, taught their children how to plant, when to harvest, and how to coax flavor from the humblest ingredients. They remembered the names of each plant in Wolof, Mandinka, and Gullah, passing down recipes that had survived capture, the ocean crossing, and the violence of bondage. Today, black-eyed peas appear on New Year's Day tables across the South, their origins rarely acknowledged. Okra thickens gumbo in kitchens from Charleston to New Orleans. Broken rice, once a symbol of deprivation, is celebrated in low-country cuisine. Each of these foods is a living testament to the agricultural genius that survived the Middle Passage. The story of American cooking is incomplete without the forbidden seeds and the hands that carried them, unseen and undefeated. Chitterlings, pig feet, gizzards, ham bone stew, ox tongue. These names echo in kitchens across the South, but their origins trace back to the edge of survival. On the plantation, animal offal was not considered fit for the master's table. Intestines, feet, tongues, and bone ends, and bones stripped bare of meat landed in wooden barrels behind the smokehouse, destined for discard or the slop bucket. For the enslaved, these scraps became the raw material for culinary transformation. The process began with labor few outsiders ever saw. Chitterlings, pig intestines, required hours of scrubbing in cold water, turning each slippery coil inside out and rinsing away every trace of waste. Only then could they be simmered, sometimes with onions or vinegar, over a low fire. The scent was sharp, the work relentless, but the result was a dish rich in protein and minerals where none had been expected. Pig feet, tossed aside as inedible, held a secret that only patient hands could unlock. Beneath the tough skin and gristle lay collagen, nature's hidden reserve. Enslaved cooks learned that if you set a pot to simmer before dawn and kept it bubbling for 8 hours or more, the collagen would slowly melt into gelatin. The feet softened, the broth thickened, and what began as a pile of bones became a silky stew. This was chemistry at the hearth, heat and time breaking down molecules, turning waste into food that could sustain a body through another day in the fields. Chicken gizzards, too tough to chew when fried, surrendered to slow braising. A pot of rice gravy, stretched with the smallest bits of organ meat, could feed a family and fuel hours of labor. Ham bones, stripped of every visible scrap, still flavored beans for a week. Even ox tongue, once scorned as a last resort, became the centerpiece of Sunday supper when cooked low and slow, sliced thin and served with pride. No part of the animal was wasted. Every tendon, every membrane, every last bit of marrow was coaxed into giving up its nutrition. The knowledge behind these dishes was not accidental. Generations of West African cooks understood the science of simmering, the way collagen becomes gelatin, the way bones leach calcium and minerals into broth. Modern nutrition confirms what these cooks practiced by necessity. Long-cooked bone and offal stews are dense in protein, micronutrients, and the building blocks that repair the body. Exactly what was needed to survive on a ration meant to break the spirit. In the hush of night, with a pot balanced on an open fire, These cooks did more than make do. They performed alchemy, transforming the unwanted into the essential, turning scraps into sustenance, and passing down a legacy of flavor and resourcefulness that endures long after the smoke has cleared. In the deep hush of the woods and along the tangled edges of fields, another kind of knowledge took root. For enslaved families, survival meant knowing not just what to plant, but what to gather. Wild greens, nuts, and seeds became lifelines, often found by moonlight and always at personal risk. WPA interviews from the 1930s recall mothers and children slipping away after dark, baskets in hand, memorizing the safe patches for dandelion, pokeweed, and wild onions. The threat was real. Discovery could mean a beating or worse, yet the stakes were clear. Without these foraged foods, the body withered. Pot liquor, the dark, fragrant broth left behind after boiling wild greens, carried more than flavor. Modern nutrition confirms what these cooks already knew. This liquid, rich in vitamins A, C, K, and iron, was more nourishing than the greens themselves. A bowl of pot liquor could restore strength after days of hard labor, its warmth a quiet promise that someone in the family still remembered the old ways. Children learned to sip it slowly, savoring every drop, while elders whispered which plants to trust and which to leave alone. Pumpkin patches offered more than flesh for stews. After the main meal, seeds were washed, dried, and roasted over coals, sometimes with a sprinkle of salt, more often plain. Each crunchy bite delivered protein and fat, rare treasures in a world ruled by starch and salt pork. Black walnuts, gathered from the forest floor, demanded patience and strong hands. Their thick shells resisted all but the hardest blows, but inside waited a kernel dense with oil and flavor. Families spent hours cracking, picking, and sharing, knowing that a handful of black walnuts could stretch a meal or sweeten a bitter day. These foods were more than supplements. They were lessons in reading the land, in passing down secrets from mother to child, in trusting memory over written word. Foraging was never just about hunger. It was about mastery, knowing which roots cured, which leaves healed, which nuts could be stored for winter. The wild landscape became a hidden pantry, mapped by generations who had no maps, only stories. Each act of gathering was a quiet defiance, a refusal to accept the boundaries set by overseers and ledgers. Even today, dishes like wild greens simmered in pot liquor, roasted pumpkin seeds, and black walnut cakes carry echoes of those foraged nights. The flavors are bold, sometimes bitter, always honest. They remind us that beneath every southern table lies a history of risk, resourcefulness, and the stubborn will to survive. The legacy of foraged foods is not just what was eaten, but how the knowledge was kept alive. One basket, one bowl, one whispered lesson at a time. James Hemings entered the kitchen of Monticello as a teenager, bound by law and blood. Trained in Paris under French chefs while enslaved by Thomas Jefferson, he mastered the art of soufflés and sauces, but it was his reimagining of humble ingredients that changed American cooking forever. Hemings took macaroni, then a European curiosity, and cheese, and transformed them into a dish that would become a national favorite. He boiled the noodles, layered them with creamy cheese, and baked them until golden, crafting comfort from what others saw as mere starch and rations. Yet, for every James Hemings whose name survives, there are tens of thousands whose genius remains unrecorded. Plantation ledgers list only Negro Cook or Old Betty, erasing the hands that stirred the pots and invented the flavors now celebrated as Southern classics. The kitchens of the South were laboratories of necessity. Cooks, often women, worked by firelight, measuring not with spoons, but with memory and instinct. Recipes passed from mother to daughter were rarely written down, their secrets guarded like family heirlooms. The taste of a perfect pot of greens or the tender pull of slow-cooked oxtail came from years of practice. not formal schooling. Many of these cooks never saw freedom, their names lost to time, their creations claimed by others. Still, their culinary fingerprints are everywhere. From the peppery bite of gumbo to the sweetness of molasses pie. The story of American food is incomplete without these architects of flavor. The brilliance that turned starvation into sustenance and scraps into celebration belongs to people whose faces rarely appear in history books. Their legacy lives on at every table, a quiet triumph over a system built to forget them. Oxtail, once tossed aside as butcher's waste, now commands $9 a pound at specialty markets. Collard greens, a dish born from foraged leaves and simmered with bones, can cost $14 for a single bowl at upscale restaurants. Bone broth, a trend splashed across wellness blogs and grocery shelves, is packaged as a health tonic. Its roots in the long, slow simmering of animal scraps by enslaved cooks erased by new marketing. The foods that once meant survival, including scraps, weeds, and bones, now fill menus as delicacies, priced beyond the reach of many whose ancestors depended on them. This price paradox is more than a twist of fate. It is a reminder that ingenuity under duress created value where none was seen. The same dishes that were once a mark of poverty are now celebrated by chefs and influencers, often without credit to the people who first coaxed flavor and nourishment from what others threw away. The story is not just about what was eaten, but about who gets to profit and who is remembered. There is a quiet power in reclaiming these foods, not just as recipes, but as testimony. Every bowl of greens, every spoonful of broth is a chance to honor the hands that stirred the first pots, the voices that taught the old ways. The next time you see oxtail on a chalkboard menu or bone broth in a glossy carton, ask whose story is being told and whose is missing. The invitation is simple. Claim the legacy, share the truth, and keep the memory alive at your own table. Today, dishes born from survival sit at the heart of American cuisine, celebrated without facing their origins. As oxtail climbs to $10 a pound and soul food restaurants thrive, the ingenuity of enslaved cooks is consumed, often uncredited. Every bite asks us to remember, whose resilience made this possible? The true cost of comfort food is memory. Share your thoughts below and keep the conversation going.